We are on the go with Joe, and today he's learning all about a local church that's also a Northwest trailblazer.
That's right. This church achieved a number of historic firsts, but most Oregonians are probably not familiar with its incredible story. Joe V is here now to tell us about its unique place in Oregon's history. Hey there, Joe.
Good morning, guys. You know, the city of St. Paul is best known for hosting one of the country's biggest rodeos. And while every 4th of July, thousands of people visit to see the bulls and broncs, they will also drive past a building with a history of worship that is older than the state itself. It's a sight you might not expect in the middle of cowboy country. A would-be cathedral and the cradle of Oregon's Catholic Church. What do outsiders say to you?
They're amazed. And they think it's a beautiful church, and they're amazed at the size of church built in the middle of the wilderness.
Monsignor Gregory Moyes is an Oregon native who has spent the last 10 years as pastor of St. Paul Roman Catholic Church.
I remember the first time when I was assigned to take over St. Paul, I knew all the history of the church, history of the parish and everything. Never been here, had no idea where it was.
To understand how this church came to be, you have to visit the roots of St. Paul more than 180 years ago, when this area was first settled by French-Canadian fur traders turned farmers. They were Catholics with no place to pray, so they built one. This is the first church in Oregon. It looked like this.
Yes, it was a log church, not very big, accommodate maybe about 60, 70 people.
The church was built in 1836, but they couldn't officially celebrate Mass because there were no priests. 2 years later, the Bishop of Quebec finally sent a pair of priests to St. Paul, including one man whose name would become synonymous with Northwest Catholics.
And Father Francis Norbert Blanchet, or Blanchet here in Oregon.
He officiated the first Mass in 1839 and even slept in the old log church until it eventually burned down. So Blanchet, who is now a territorial bishop, set out to build something bigger.
They killed all the bricks right here on the land because it's kind of clay. They built it as a cathedral because he was a bishop, and the bishop always has the seat of the bishop there. So they built this big thing here. Finished in 1846.
Then that same year, something unexpected happened. On a trip to Rome, Bishop Blanchet was surprisingly appointed an archbishop. Now, you have to realize, at that time, only one U.S. city had an archdiocese. That was Baltimore. Now, Oregon, which wasn't even a state yet, had an archdiocese ahead of cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. Like, what modern states were part of this archdiocese?
At the time, it would have been what's now Washington State, Idaho, Montana, part of Wyoming, and of course Oregon. To administer his new territory, Blanchet had to leave St. Paul and move to Oregon City. With a bishop no longer present, this planned cathedral was now simply a church. A big, ornate church in the middle of a small rural area that 170 years later is still pretty small and still pretty rural. The pews are probably about 140 years old. They're new.
New, 140 years old. And while St. Paul was once envisioned as the headquarters of Pacific Northwest Catholic life, today its aims are smaller but no less important. The church is home to about 300 local parishioners, and it's a registered historic landmark with a unique claim.
They say it's the oldest brick building in Oregon, but I haven't gone around to check other brick buildings.
So while the rest of the world may change around it, the old church continues to stand as a testament to faith and just good old-fashioned craftsmanship. A tradition that should continue for generations to come with proper care and maybe a few prayers.
It takes care of itself.
Well, you've got help.
Yeah, I've got help. Yeah, that's true. It's done real well.
So here's another little interesting tidbit. So through the years, they did a bunch of renovations to the church, and probably the late 19th century, one of the pastors put in like these arches, like on the inside. You saw them in the story there. Basically, because it's a fancy-looking church, it should have arches. There's no real practical use for them, but in the mid-90s, or early 90s, actually, there was what they called the Mount Angel earthquake. There was extensive damage to the church. They had to repair it, but if they hadn't have had those arches, probably the whole thing would have collapsed.
Wow.
So kind of like some divine intervention there. It was actually, the church was closed for a couple years while they repaired it, but those bricks that you see there, those are the original bricks that were put there
so
170 years ago still.
I love learning some of these historical things about our state.
And again, if you've ever been to St. Paul Rodeo, you've driven past this place. It's right in the heart of downtown, but you probably,
a little gem.
I surely didn't know any of this
stuff. With so much history, never would have thought.
Joe, thank you.
Okay, now let's go back. Besides just over the 4th of July weekend, we'll go back and check it out.
Exactly, yeah. You have another reason to visit now.
Okay, good.